The flames licked the night sky, their glow casting eerie shadows on the marble columns of Alexandria's harbor. The smell of smoke and charred papyrus filled the air, mingling with a salty sea breeze. Somewhere, beyond the screaming of soldiers and the clash of swords, a softer, more tragic sound could be heard. The quiet crackle of scrolls, brittle with age, turning to ash. Scholars stood frozen, powerless, their life's work unraveling in an inferno that seemed almost cosmic in its cruelty. Imagine a world where the wisdom of centuries, the carefully recorded discoveries of philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, was gathered in one place. Imagine the beating heart of human curiosity, stored on shelves that stretched endlessly, scroll upon scroll, each one a voice from the distant past whispering secrets to the future. That was the Library of Alexandria. To witness its destruction was to witness the death of memory itself. The story of the library has haunted humanity for over 2 millennia. It is more than a historical tragedy. It is a ghost that lingers in our collective imagination. When we speak of the burning of the Library of Alexandria, we are not merely recounting an isolated event. We are invoking the great what-if of history. What if those scrolls had survived? What could we have learned centuries earlier? Could we have sent rockets to the moon in the Middle Ages? Could penicillin, electricity, or even quantum theory have been discovered 1,000 years ahead of schedule? The destruction of the library has become a symbol of loss so profound that it transcends the literal. It represents every lost manuscript, every forgotten language, every moment when human brilliance was snuffed out before it could illuminate the world. The flames of Alexandria are the flames of Babylon's tablets, of Mayan codices, of ancient Indian and Chinese texts lost to war and weather. In the mind's eye, they are all one and the same. But the true story of the Library of Alexandria is more complicated and more fascinating than the simple image of a single catastrophic fire. In fact, historians still debate when, how, and even whether such a dramatic burning ever happened. Some argue that Julius Caesar's campaign in 48 BC accidentally set the first spark when he ordered the harbor ships burned, and the fire spread to nearby warehouses storing papyri. Others claim it was centuries later, under the Christian patriarch Theophilus, that the temple of Serapis, and possibly its literary treasures, were destroyed. Still others point to the Arab conquest in the 7th century, when Caliph Omar allegedly ordered any remaining scrolls burned to heat the city's bathhouses. What is certain is that over time, the great repository of human knowledge dwindled. Whether by fire, neglect, looting, or deliberate purges, scroll by scroll, the voices of antiquity fell silent. And so began one of the greatest mysteries of history. What, exactly, was lost? Some contemporaries hinted at a staggering scale. Ancient writers like Strabo and Aulus Gellius spoke of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perhaps 500,000. The library was said to collect every text it could find, even seizing manuscripts from ships docking in Alexandria, copying them, and storing the originals. In that sense, the library was the first attempt to create a global database, a universal memory bank for humanity. Its loss, therefore, was not just a loss of Egyptian or Greek wisdom. It was a loss of a world's worth of knowledge. And this is where the mystery takes a turn from tragedy to tantalizing possibility. For if the library truly held a combined intellectual effort to the ancient world, including works we know existed but have since vanished, then its destruction was not just a cultural calamity. It was a missed opportunity that may have changed the trajectory of civilization itself. As we peer back through the haze of history, we must ask, what did humanity lose at night, or across those centuries of decline? What secrets were turned to ash before they could change our destiny? Were there medical cures, technological marvels, or philosophical ideas far ahead of their time? Could there have been evidence of forgotten civilizations, star maps of lost continents, or even histories of worlds beyond our own? Tonight, we will embark on a journey, not just through history, but through possibility. We will reconstruct what the library might have contained, using clues from surviving fragments, ancient accounts, and modern scholarship. We will weigh the myth against the evidence, peel back the layers of speculation, and confront the sobering reality of what we may have truly lost. And along the way, we will confront a deeper question. What does this story say about us, about humanity's fragile relationship with its own memory? Because while the Library of Alexandria may be gone, the danger it represents is very much alive. Even today, knowledge can be erased in an instant, through war, censorship, or even the slow decay of digital information. This is not just a story of a library. This is a story of humanity's hunger to know, and the cost we pay when we fail to protect what we learn. So, as the last embers die down and the city of Alexandria sleeps under a sky still glowing red from the night's destruction, we begin our investigation. The past calls to us, whispering through the smoke. And if we listen closely enough, perhaps, just perhaps, we can still recover some of what was lost. To understand why the Library of Alexandria became the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, we must first step back to the time of its birth, a period when Egypt was no longer ruled by pharaohs but by foreign kings, the Ptolemies, who were determined to make their mark on history. It all began with Alexander the Great. In 331 BCE, after a whirlwind campaign that toppled the Persian Empire, the young Macedonian general founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. He named it after himself, Alexandria. His vision was not merely to create another military outpost, but a shining beacon of Hellenistic culture, a city that would fuse Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern traditions into something entirely new. Alexander's sudden death left his dream unfinished, but his successors, the Ptolemaic dynasty, embraced the idea with zeal. They transformed Alexandria into a cosmopolitan metropolis with grand boulevards, majestic palaces, and bustling markets. The city quickly became a center of trade linking Europe, Africa, and Asia, a place where goods, ideas, and cultures mingle freely. But one Ptolemaic ruler, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, saw an opportunity to elevate Alexandria beyond commerce and politics. He dreamed of making his capital the intellectual heart of the known world. His solution? To build the greatest library mankind had ever seen, a repository that would gather every scrap of knowledge, every poem, every scientific treatise, every religious text, every historical account that existed. The scale of this ambition cannot be overstated. In an age when books were not mass-produced but painstakingly copied by hand onto fragile papyrus scrolls, the idea of collecting all the world's knowledge was nothing short of audacious. Yet Ptolemy's vision was relentless. He ordered royal agents to scour the Mediterranean for texts. Whenever ships docked in Alexandria, their manuscripts were seized, copied, and catalogued. The originals were kept for the library's collection. Copies were returned to the owners. This was not piracy. This was state policy. The library itself was built within the royal quarter, close to the palace complex in the famous Mausoleum, a temple dedicated to the muses, goddesses of art and learning. The Mausoleum was more than a temple. It was a kind of ancient research institute, housing scholars, philosophers, astronomers, and poets. Together, the Mausoleum and the library formed a twin institution, one a place of study, the other a treasury of human knowledge. Accounts suggest that the library may have eventually held between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, a staggering number for its time. Imagine vast halls lined with shelves, each stacked with scrolls carefully labeled and categorized. Imagine scribes bent over desks, copying, translating, and preserving works from every corner of the known world: Greece, Egypt, Babylon, India, even as far as China. The goal was nothing less than universality. If knowledge existed, the Ptolemies wanted it. The library was rumored to hold texts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, navigation, literature, philosophy, and religion. It likely preserved plays that are now lost, entire schools of thought erased by time, and histories of kingdoms whose names we no longer know. But this was not merely a storage facility. The library's true genius was that it was alive, a living, breathing institution where ideas were debated and refined. Scholars were provided with lodging, stipends, and food, allowing them to dedicate their lives to research. Eratosthenes, one of its most famous residents, used the library's resources to calculate the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy over 2,000 years before satellites confirmed his measurements. This was a place where theory and practice met. When Euclid developed the foundations of geometry, when Herophilos dissected human bodies to study anatomy, when astronomers mapped the stars and physicians experimented with treatments, they were working in the intellectual environment that Alexandria natured. The Ptolemies understood that this project would cement their legacy. By gathering and protecting the world's knowledge, they made themselves patrons of civilization. Alexandria was no longer just a city. It was an idea, a lighthouse for the mind as much as for the sailor approaching its coast. Of course, such ambition came with challenges. The task of collecting, cataloging, and preserving such a vast number of works was monumental. The scrolls were vulnerable to decay, insects, and humidity. Scribal errors crept into copies, and politics were never far from scholarship. The Ptolemies sometimes commissioned translations that flattered their rule or suppressed writings that threatened their authority. Even so, their efforts stand as one of the most remarkable intellectual endeavors in human history. As word of the library spread, Alexandria began to attract the brightest minds of the ancient world. It became a magnet for knowledge seekers, mathematicians from Greece, priests from Egypt, philosophers from India, engineers from Mesopotamia. The city itself became a crucible of cross-cultural exchange, a place where Greek rationalism met Egyptian mysticism, where Babylonian astronomy was compared with Indian cosmology. And so, within a few decades of its founding, Alexandria was no longer just a port city. It was a beating heart of an intellectual revolution, a revolution that promised to lift humanity to new heights of understanding. But history has a cool sense of irony. The same qualities that made the Library of Alexandria magnificent also made it fragile. Its very centralization, the gathering of so much knowledge in one place, meant that a single act of destruction could erase centuries of progress. And that is precisely what makes its fate so tragic. This section closes with the image of the library in its prime, the corridors lit by oil lamps, the air smelling of ink and papyrus, the murmur of scholars debating under vaulted ceilings. A place where, for a brief and shining moment, humanity dared to dream of knowing everything. But dreams are delicate things. And soon, this dream would face its first great trial, one that would shake the foundations of the library and cast a long shadow over the centuries to come. As the Library of Alexandria took shape, so too did the city around it, a city unlike any other in the ancient world. To understand the library's importance, we must first see Alexandria itself, for it was not just a backdrop but a living, breathing organism that fed the library's soul. Alexandria was a city designed to impress. Built on the orders of Alexander the Great and completed under his successors, it was laid out with a precision that reflected Greek rationalism, a grid of straight streets intersecting at right angles, wide boulevards lined with colonnades, and a royal quarter that gleamed with marble and gold. The city stretched along the coast like a jewel, connected to the island of Pharos by a man-made causeway. At its tip rose the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, its fire visible for miles out to sea, guiding ships safely to harbor. Those ships brought more than goods. They carried ideas, new philosophy from Athens, mathematical treatises from Rhodes, herbal medicine from India, astronomical charts from Babylon. Alexandria's harbor became a kind of intellectual gateway, where traders, diplomats, and scholars exchanged not just spices and gold, but knowledge itself. Walking through Alexandria in its prime would have been a sensory experience unlike any other. The air was thick with the smell of incense from Egyptian temples, mingling with the salty sea breeze and the aromas of foreign spices sold in the markets. Merchants shouted in dozens of languages: Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Latin, Nubian. Philosophers debated in the agora, while scribes hurried toward the library with scrolls tucked under their arms. Musicians played in open courtyards, and priests carried out rituals to ancient gods in one street while mathematicians measured star positions in another. It was, in short, a melting pot, a city where cultures collided and fused. And that was precisely what the Ptolemies wanted. They saw Alexandria not only as the capital of Egypt, but as the intellectual and cultural capital of the Hellenistic world. To attract scholars, they endowed the Mausoleum, a great institution that combined elements of a university, a monastery, and a research laboratory. Scholars were offered stipends, housing, and access to the royal court. This patronage created an atmosphere of intellectual ferment. Imagine a day in the life of a visiting scholar. He wakes at dawn in quarters near the Mausoleum, walks through column halls to the library, selects a scroll from the shelves, perhaps a newly acquired text from India or mathematics, and begins to translate it into Greek. Later, he joins a group of fellow scholars for a midday symposium where they debate the nature of the cosmos or the best way to calculate the circumference of the earth. By nightfall, he retires to his chamber, his mind buzzing with ideas. The presence of so many great minds in one place turned Alexandria into the think tank of the ancient world. This was where Eratosthenes calculated Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy, using nothing more than shadows, geometry, and logic. It was here that Herophilos dissected human cadavers and advanced medicine by centuries. Astronomers like Hipparchus refined star charts and debated heliocentric theories long before Copernicus was even born. But Alexandria was not all ivory towers and academic purity. It was also a city of politics, intrigue, and ambition. The royal court buzzed with plots, alliances, and betrayals, and scholars sometimes found themselves entangled in dynastic disputes. Knowledge, after all, was power, and power always drew attention. The city was also home to vibrant religious diversity. Egyptian priests still served the ancient gods, while Greeks worshipped their Olympian pantheon, and Jews maintained a thriving community that produced the Septuagint, the Greek translation of Hebrew scriptures, possibly within the library's very walls. Such coexistence was not always peaceful, but it created an environment where ideas cross-pollinated. Mystical traditions, philosophical schools, and early scientific thought mingled, often influencing one another in ways that still shape human understanding today. The economic engine of Alexandria also fueled the library's mission. The city's strategic location on the Mediterranean made it one of the richest ports in the world, with trade routes stretching deep into Africa, across the Arabian Desert, and into Asia. The wealth of the Ptolemaic dynasty funded the copying of texts, the hiring of scribes, and construction of facilities to preserve fragile papyri. It is important to appreciate that the library was not isolated from this bustling environment. It was deeply embedded within it, feeding on the lifeblood of the city. Every new ship that entered the harbor was a potential source of new knowledge. Every merchant who carried a scroll from a distant land became an unwitting contributor to humanity's collective memory. For the citizens of Alexandria, the library was a source of pride, even if most of them never set foot inside. To live in Alexandria was to live at the heart of the intellectual world. Its lighthouse guided sailors, but its library guided civilization. And yet, beneath this golden age, there were storm clouds gathering. The very ambition that made Alexandria great also made it vulnerable. The city's wealth and strategic importance attracted conquerors, and its royal court was often thrown into chaos by succession crises. Whenever armies fought in the streets, the library was at risk. Whenever political factions clashed, scholars could be exiled, texts censored, or scrolls neglected. Still, in its prime, Alexandria was a city of knowledge, a place where humanity dared to gather everything it knew and put it under one roof. For a few shining centuries, it succeeded, and that is what makes the tragedy of its eventual decline so haunting. For when the fires came, and they did not merely destroy a building. They struck at the very heart of a civilization that believed, perhaps naively, that knowledge could be made immortal. As we leave the bustling streets of Alexandria and step back into the cool, lamplit halls of the library, we can almost hear the whispers of scholars echoing through the ages. They are waiting for us to tell their story, before the next chapter begins, when war will come knocking at the city gates and the first spark of destruction will fly. If the library of Alexandria was the beating heart of ancient knowledge, then its scholars and scribes were its lifeblood, the men and women who kept the ideas flowing, copied them, debated them, and gave them new life. To understand the magic of the library, we must meet the brilliant minds who walked its colonnades, bent over its scrolls, and transformed it from a maze storehouse into a living engine of human progress. Picture the scene. The marble halls of the Mausian bath in morning light, the sound of sandals tapping against polished floors. Scribes sit at long wooden tables, their reed pens scratching across fresh papyrus sheets as they copy newly acquired manuscripts. Nearby, philosophers gather in heated debate, gesturing animatedly as they argue over the nature of the cosmos or the properties of geometry. The air smells faintly of ink, smoke from oil lamps, and the salty wind that drifts in from the harbor. This was not a quiet, dusty place. The library of Alexandria was alive, a hive of intellectual activity. It attracted some of the greatest minds of antiquity. Euclid, the father of geometry, is said to have taught here, developing his famous Elements, a work so influential that it would remain a cornerstone of mathematics for over 2,000 years. Herophilos, the pioneering physician, performed dissections and made groundbreaking discoveries about the nervous system, the brain, and the circulatory system, insights that would be forgotten for centuries after his death. Then there was Eratosthenes, the librarian himself, whose genius still astonishes modern science. Using nothing more than shadows cast by the sun in two different cities, he calculated the circumference of the earth with a margin of error so small it would not be matched until modern times. Imagine standing beside him as he explains his logic to a group of eager students, sketching circles on the floor with a stick, proving that the planet is round, over 1,700 years before Columbus would sail west. These scholars were not merely guardians of the past, they were inventors of the future. Archimedes corresponded with the library, sharing his revolutionary insights on mathematics, physics, and engineering. There are whispers that hero of Alexandria's early steam engine, the Aeolipile, may have been designed using text stored within these walls. Had such devices been developed further, some historians speculate the Industrial Revolution could have come centuries earlier. The scribes were just as crucial as the scholars. Their painstaking labor ensured that fragile scrolls were copied, preserved, and disseminated. Day after day, they worked with monastic precision, carefully transcribing texts, sometimes translating them into Greek so that scholars from across the Mediterranean could access them. Without these scribes, the knowledge gathered in Alexandria would have remained locked away in dead languages, inaccessible to future generations. But copying was not a neutral act. Every scribe, every translator, every editor became a silent collaborator with history. They made choices, which texts to preserve, which to ignore, which to alter slightly for clarity or politics. Some scrolls might have been edited to flatter the Ptolemaic rulers, others perhaps suppressed because they were seen as heretical or dangerous. Thus, the library was not just a mirror of the world's knowledge, it was a curated vision of it, shaped by the values of its keepers. Life in the library was intense, even competitive. Scholars debated fiercely, sometimes publicly humiliating one another in arguments that could last for hours. These intellectual battles were not just academic. They could determine royal favor, funding, or the future direction of research. Some accounts suggest that scholars who displeased the rulers could be banished, their works confiscated, or their reputations ruined. Knowledge was power, and power could be ruthless. Yet despite these tensions, there was a sense of shared purpose. The dream of the Library of Alexandria was bigger than any single scholar. Its mission was nothing less than to understand the universe, to map the stars, measure the earth, catalog the plants and animals, record the histories of nations, and preserve the wisdom of ages. For those who worked within its halls, every scroll was a sacred trust, every discovery a contribution to humanity's collective memory. Imagine being a young apprentice, newly arrived in Alexandria, stepping into the library for the first time. The towering shelves seem endless, stretching beyond sight. Each scroll is a mystery waiting to be unrolled, a voice from another land or another century whispering its secrets to you. Perhaps you are handed a work of Aristotle, or an obscure treatise on Babylonian astronomy, or a medical text from India. In this place, you feel the weight of time and the thrill of possibility. This was the power of the library scholars and scribes. They turned Alexandria into a crucible where old knowledge was melted down and reforged into something new. The library did not just preserve the past, it accelerated the future, and that is precisely why its eventual loss is so heartbreaking. These were not just books. They were the distilled genius of entire civilizations, painstakingly collected, copied, and debated by generations of brilliant minds. When the flames came, they did not simply consume parchment. They consumed lifetimes of thought, centuries of progress, entire world of imagination. But that dark day is still to come. For now, the library stands in all its glory, its scholars working tirelessly, its scribes filling shelf after shelf. The dream of universal knowledge is alive, and it feels unstoppable. Little do they know that history is about to test them, and that the first trial by fire is closer than anyone suspects. If the Library of Alexandria was the great brain of the ancient world, then its scrolls were the neurons, millions of fragile threads of thought connecting civilizations across continents and centuries. To truly appreciate what was lost, we must first understand the staggering scope of what was gathered. The Ptolemies were not passive collectors. They were relentless. Their agents were dispatched across the Mediterranean with a single mission: acquire knowledge at any cost. Ships that docked in Alexandria were required by royal decree to surrender any books or scrolls on board. These works were taken to the library's scriptorum, copied by expert scribes, and meticulously catalogued. The originals were kept, and the copies, stamped with a word from the ships, were returned to their owners. It was intellectual confiscation, yes, but it also meant that Alexandria became the final resting place of works that might otherwise have been lost to the chaos of time. Picture this vast operation. Scribes working day and night in the glow of oil lamps, stacks of scrolls waiting to be copied, translators laboring over foreign scripts. Greek, Egyptian hieratic, Phoenician, Hebrew, Aramaic, Sanskrit, all languages were welcome here. The goal was universal knowledge. The Ptolemies wanted everything. Plays from Athens, epics from India, medical treatises from Mesopotamia, astronomical record from Babylon, engineering manuals from Carthage, even travelers' logs from distant lands beyond the known world. One of the most ambitious projects undertaken here was the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, a work that would come to be known as the Septuagint. This was not merely a literary exercise, but a profound act of cultural synthesis, bringing Jewish scripture into the Hellenistic intellectual fold. The story goes that 72 scholars, working under royal patronage, each produced identical translations independently, a miraculous sign of divine approval, or so legend claims. But the library's appetite was not limited to religion. It sought out works on mathematics, philosophy, agriculture, medicine, navigation, zoology, and botany. Imagine the shelves lined with scrolls describing medicinal herbs from India, irrigation techniques from Mesopotamia, astronomical star charts from Babylon, philosophical dialogues from Athens, and shipbuilding techniques from Phoenicia. The reach of the library was astonishing. Some historians believe that texts from as far east as India and China may have made their way here via trade routes. Could there have been early Buddhist texts, proto-scientific treatises, or lost inventions that we have no record of today? The very thought is tantalizing. The Ptolemies even tried to secure texts by force when necessary. Ptolemy III is said to have borrowed official copies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides from Athens under a massive deposit, then chose to forfeit the deposit rather than return the originals. Those priceless works were added to Alexandria's collection, while the Athenians were left with copies. For the Ptolemies, this was a fair trade. Gold could always be replenished, but knowledge was priceless. And so the collection grew, swelling to hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Estimates vary, but some ancient sources claim the number reached 400,000, 500,000, perhaps even 700,000. Imagine wandering the halls and seeing shelf after shelf, room after room, filled with scrolls, an ocean of human thought gathered under one roof. The library's system of classification was itself revolutionary. Callimachus, one of the early librarians, compiled the Penarchies, a comprehensive catalogue of all the works stored within, divided into genres, law, history, medicine, mathematics, rhetoric, and so on. It was arguably the world's first attempt at organizing knowledge on a systematic, encyclopedic scale. This made the library not just a storehouse, but an active tool for discovery. A scholar could consult the Penarchies to find texts by a particular author, compare different versions, and perhaps write commentaries or corrections. In many ways, the Library of Alexandria was a prototype for modern research libraries, universities, and even the Internet, a network of information meant to connect seekers of knowledge with the answers they desired. Yet there was a darker side to this relentless collecting. Not everyone saw the Ptolemies as benevolent guardians of human knowledge. Some viewed their policies as theft, an imperial project of cultural domination, appropriating the intellectual heritage of other nations to enrich their own prestige. For the Ptolemies, however, the moral calculus was simple. Knowledge belonged to all humanity, and they were merely its stewards. The scrolls themselves were fragile, each one made from papyrus reeds cut, pressed, and glued into sheets. A single work could require dozens, even hundreds, of scrolls to contain its entirety. The halls of the library must have smelled of dried papyrus, ink, and the faint mustiness of aging parchment. Fire, moisture, and insects were constant threats. Special storage rooms were likely built to preserve the most precious works, perhaps even with primitive climate control, clay jars of water to keep humidity stable, or cedar oils to deter pests. It is almost unbearable to think of how much must have been stored there, and how much of it is now gone. Plays by Sophocles and Euripides we have never read. Histories of entire nations now lost to memory. Medical knowledge that could have saved lives centuries earlier. Maps of lands whose coastlines we did not rediscover until the age of exploration. And yet, even as a collection reached its zenith, its very greatness made it vulnerable. For to concentrate so much of the world wisdom in a single place was to place it all at the mercy of fate, of fire, flood, war, and time. The scrolls from across the world were safe, for now, resting in the cool, shadowed halls of the library. But just beyond the horizon, history was stirring. Soon, the city would find itself in the path of armies, and the library would face its first great trial. For centuries, the Library of Alexandria has been described as a treasure trove of the ancient world, a place where the sum total of human knowledge was gathered, catalogued, and preserved. But what, exactly, did those countless scrolls contain? This question lies at the heart of the mystery. And while we may never know for certain, clues from surviving texts, ancient catalogues, and historical references allow us to reconstruct a tantalizing glimpse into what humanity may have lost. Start with the obvious, literature. The library is said to have housed the complete works of the great Greek playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, far beyond a handful of plays that survive today. Imagine reading lost tragedies that rival Oedipus Rex or Medea, plays that could reshape how we understand Greek drama. There may have been epics that told stories we have never heard, poems that sang of forgotten heroes, comedies that made audiences laugh 2,000 years ago but are now silent forever. Then there were the histories. Herodotus and Thucydides survive, but what of the many other historians whose works were mentioned by ancient authors yet no longer exist? Entire chronicles of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Carthage could have been stored here. Perhaps detailed annals of kingdoms we barely know by name, Nubia, Scythia, even records of early India or China. These scrolls might have contained eyewitness accounts of events now shrouded in myth, bridging the gap between legend and history. Science and mathematics were surely among the library's crown jewels. The Greeks, Egyptians, and Babylonians were masters of geometry, astronomy, and engineering. Could there have been treatises explaining technology centuries ahead of its time? Some speculate that blueprints for devices like Hero's steam engine were not unique curiosities, but part of a broader tradition of mechanical innovation that might have triggered an industrial revolution 2 millennia earlier, had those works survived. Astronomy alone opened staggering possibilities. Ancient Babylonian star charts were incredibly precise, and Greek astronomers like Aristarchus proposed heliocentric models of the solar system long before Copernicus. What if the library contained lost works expanding on these ideas, offering mathematical proofs of Earth's orbit, planetary motion, or even early speculation about other worlds? Medical knowledge may have been equally revolutionary. Herophilos and other Alexandrian physicians dissected human bodies and made discoveries that were lost for centuries, including the distinction between veins and arteries and the understanding of the brain, not the heart, control thought. Imagine if detailed anatomical atlases, surgical manuals, and pharmacological guides were stored in the library. Could antibiotics or antiseptic practices have been discovered 1,000 years earlier? Could pandemics that devastated the Middle Ages have been mitigated by knowledge we once held but allowed to vanish? Then there's philosophy, not just the Greek schools like Stoicism and Epicureanism, but also works from India, Persia, and Egypt that may have been translated into Greek. Early Buddhist sutras, Zoroastrian texts, Hermetic writings. These could have offered humanity profound spiritual and ethical frameworks, influencing the course of religion and philosophy worldwide. Perhaps most tantalizing of all are the lost maps and geographical works. Eratosthenes, working in Alexandria, calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy. What if the library contained detailed maps of Africa, Asia, or even hints of lands across the Atlantic? Some speculative historians argue that knowledge of the Americas may not have been entirely unknown, that Phoenician or Carthaginian sailors might have reached distant shores, their voyages recorded and stored in Alexandria. Whether or not such theories hold weight, the possibility keeps imaginations burning. There may have been records of civilizations now completely forgotten. The library could have preserved oral traditions from early Africa, detailed histories of Mesopotamian city-states, or descriptions of technologies and customs from cultures whose ruins we are only now beginning to unearth. Each lost scroll represents not just a missing text, but a missing voice, a missing perspective on what it meant to be human. And we must not forget the possibility of esoteric or forbidden knowledge. Alchemical recipes, mystical rituals, secret doctrines. These too may have been part of the collection. In later centuries, writers whispered that the library contained secrets too dangerous for humanity, knowledge that could unleash power beyond comprehension. Whether this is truth or legend hardly matters. It adds to the aura of the library as a place where the boundary between the known and the unknown was thin, almost porous. The sheer range of material would have been staggering. Agriculture, navigation, architecture, law codes, music theory, linguistics, every field of inquiry had its place. The library was nothing less than an attempt to create a universal memory for humankind, and that is why its lost haunts us so deeply. It is not just a tragedy of a fire or a conquest, it is a tragedy of all the what ifs. What if the Renaissance had happened 1,000 years earlier? What if the scientific method had been formalized in antiquity? What if humanity had had a head start of centuries in curing disease, harnessing power, or exploring space? As we imagine these shelves, heavy with scrolls, the feeling is almost unbearable, as though we are standing on the edge of a vast, dark ocean, staring out at the glimmers of light we still possess, while knowing that an entire continent of knowledge lies sunken beneath the waves, forever out of reach. The Library of Alexandria was a miracle of human ambition, but it was also a fragile one. Its scrolls were as vulnerable as dry leaves in the wind. And soon, those winds would rise. The next chapter of this story will take us into the heart of the storm, to the first great fire that threatened to undo all that had been built. The golden age of collecting was coming to an end. The age of survival was about to begin. The year was 48 BCE, and Alexandria, the shining jewel of Egypt, the beacon of learning, found itself at the center of storm. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, had arrived in Egypt chasing his rival Pompey Magnus, only to step into a political quagmire that would soon engulf the city. Egypt was torn by civil war. Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII were locked in a brutal struggle for throne. Caesar, seeing an opportunity to secure Rome's influence over this wealthy and strategically vital kingdom, sided with Cleopatra. His presence in the royal palace turned Alexandria into a battlefield. At first, the conflict was political maneuvering, tense negotiations, royal decrees, secret alliances. But soon, the tension boiled over into outright war. The Alexandrian forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII laid siege to the palace where Caesar and Cleopatra were holed up. The Roman general, vastly outnumbered and cut off from reinforcements, faced annihilation. It was during this desperate moment that Caesar made a fateful decision, a decision that would, according to many ancient sources, set fire to history itself. To block the enemy fleet from attacking him by sea, Caesar ordered the burning of the ships in Alexandria's harbor. Flames leapt from vessel to vessel, crackling in the Mediterranean night, smoke rising high above the city. But fire is a force that does not respect borders. The inferno spread from the docks to nearby buildings, and soon much of the harbor district was ablaze. Ancient writers such as Plutarch and Seneca later claimed that the fire reached the great warehouses where papyrus scrolls were stored, warehouses that acted as extensions of the Library of Alexandria. If these accounts are correct, tens of thousands of manuscripts may have been reduced to ash in that single night. Picture the scene through the eyes of a scholar who lived near the library. He wakes to the smell of smoke, the sky glowing orange outside his window. He runs toward the docks, hearing the shouts of soldiers and the crack of collapsing timbers. When he arrives, it is too late. Flames leap high into the night, consuming the warehouses. He sees scrolls, precious, irreplaceable scrolls, scattered, curling, blackening in the heat. Each one is a life's work, a voice from the past, gone forever. Caesar himself seems to have been aware of the destruction, though he downplayed its significance. In his own commentaries, he makes no mention of the library, focusing instead on the military victory he eventually won. For him, the burning of the ships was a brilliant tactical maneuver, a calculated risk that allowed him to seize control of the harbor, rally his forces, and ultimately defeat Ptolemy's army. But for the scholars of Alexandria, it was a catastrophe. Later writers like Strabo, Dio Cassius, and Aulus Gellius suggest that a great portion of the library's collection perished. Some say 40,000 scrolls were destroyed. Others place the number closer to 100,000. Even if the main library building survived, the loss of so many stored texts was a blow from which the collection may never have fully recovered. And yet, here the story takes on its first layer of historical ambiguity. Not all historians agree that the main library was destroyed at this time. Some argue that only the warehouses near the docks burned, and that the core of the library, located within the royal quarter, remained intact. Others suggest that much of the damage was later repaired, and that new acquisitions replenished the collection. This uncertainty is part of the mystery that has haunted the story of Alexandria ever since. Was this the moment the library truly fell, or merely its first round? Did Caesar unintentionally set humanity back by centuries, or did the library live on for another few hundred years, only to meet its final destruction later? Regardless of the debate, one thing is certain. The siege of Alexandria marked the beginning of the library's decline. It revealed how vulnerable this treasure trove of human knowledge truly was. For the first time, the dream of collecting all the world's wisdom had been interrupted by the brutal reality of war. Cleopatra, ever the pragmatist, may have sought to rebuild what was lost. As queen, she is said to have continued the library's tradition of acquiring and preserving texts. Some sources claim that Mark Antony, her lover and ally, later gifted her 200,000 scrolls taken from the Library of Pergamon to replenish Alexandria's collection, a gesture of love, but also of restoration. Whether this story is entirely true or a romantic embellishment, it suggests that the idea of the library was far from dead after Caesar's siege. But the first flames had been lit. The image of scrolls burning under the Alexandrian night would linger as an omen of what was to come. This was not yet the end, but it was a warning. Knowledge, no matter how carefully guarded, was not immune to the chaos of history. As the smoke cleared and Caesar claimed victory, Alexandria returned to a semblance of normalcy. The palace intrigues continued, Cleopatra tightened her grip on power, and the library may have reopened its doors. But something had changed. A sense of invincibility had been shattered. The great collection, once thought eternal, had proven mortal, and the centuries ahead would bring more wars, more conquests, and more opportunities for disaster. The first fire was only the beginning. If Julius Caesar's siege was the first spark that singed the library of Alexandria, the centuries that followed were a slow and relentless firestorm. Alexandria remained a city of knowledge, but each generation brought new turmoil, and with every upheaval, a little more of the great library slipped into the abyss. Nearly 200 years after Caesar's campaign, Alexandria once again became a battlefield. The Roman Empire was in crisis, torn apart by internal rivalries and foreign invasions. In the mid-3rd century CE, Emperor Aurelian fought to reclaim the eastern provinces from Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. Zenobia's forces had seized Alexandria, cutting off one of Rome's most valuable ports. Aurelian's legions marched on the city, determined to bring it back under imperial control. The fighting was fierce. Ancient sources tell us that entire districts of Alexandria were devastated during Aurelian's reconquest. Among the areas destroyed was a royal quarter, the very heart of the city where the Mausoleum and the Great Library were located. If any portion of the original collection had survived Caesar's fire, it may have perished here, reduced to ash as Roman soldiers battled through the streets. But Alexandria's tragedy did not end there. Even as the Roman Empire stabilized, a new force was rising within its borders: Christianity. By the late 4th century CE, Christianity had become the official religion of the empire, and the pagan temples of antiquity were increasingly seen as relics of a dangerous, idolatrous past. In 391 CE, the Christian patriarch Theophilus led a campaign to suppress paganism in Alexandria. He ordered the destruction of the Serapeum, a magnificent temple dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis. The Serapeum was more than a temple. It was also a sanctuary for learning, possibly housing a daughter library, an annex of the main collection. Imagine the scene: chanting mobs flooding the temple, smashing idols, toppling statues, setting fire to shrines. In the chaos, any scrolls kept there, copies of priceless works, perhaps even the last remnants of texts once stored in the great library, were burned or scattered. The Christian chronicler Socrates Scholasticus recorded the event as a triumph over paganism, but for historians of knowledge, it marked another devastating step in the erasure of humanity's intellectual inheritance. By this time, the original Mausoleum was likely no longer functioning as a great research institution it once was. The royal patronage that had fueled its golden age had long faded, and its scholars had either fled, been killed, or simply moved on. What remained of the collection may have been fragmented, hidden in private libraries, or left to decay. And still, the story does not end. The Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century brought yet another turning point. According to later medieval sources, when the Muslim general Amr ibn al-As captured Alexandria in 642 CE, he wrote to Caliph Omar asking what should be done with the remaining books. Omar allegedly replied that if the books agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary, and if they disagreed, they were dangerous, and so they were to be burned. The scrolls, it is said, were used as fuel to heat the city's bathhouses for 6 months. Modern scholars debate this account, with many dismissing it as a later legend. There is little contemporary evidence to prove such a massive destruction took place at that time. And yet, whether literal or symbolic, the story reflects a grim truth. By the time of the Arab conquest, whatever had once been the library of Alexandria was already a shadow of its former self. What makes this saga so haunting is that there was no single day the library burned, no one moment when all was lost. Instead, it was death by 1,000 cuts, Caesar's fire in 48 BCE, Aurelian's reconquest in the 270s, Theophilus' purge in 391, and centuries of neglect, war, and gradual decay. Each catastrophe chipped away at the dream of a universal library, until finally there was nothing left to destroy. Imagine a row of oil lamps burning one by one in a darkened hole. Each time war came, each time a mob rioted, each time a scroll crumbled from disuse, another lamp went out. By the dawn of the Middle Ages, the whole was almost entirely dark. And yet, even in this darkness, faint echoes of Alexandria survived. Some texts had been copied and taken elsewhere. Some knowledge traveled through Arabic scholars in Baghdad, where it would eventually help ignite the European Renaissance. But the library itself, that grand, impossible dream of gathering all human knowledge under one roof, was gone. The tragedy of these repeated catastrophes is that they robbed us not only of books, but of continuity. Had Alexandria survived intact, humanity might have leapt forward by centuries, avoiding long ages of ignorance and rediscovery. The loss was not just intellectual, it was civilizational. And now, standing in the ashes of this centuries-long destruction, we must confront the question that drives the heart of this story. What exactly did we lose? The next section will take us into the evidence that remains, the surviving fragments, the clues left behind in other texts, to try to piece together a picture of the library's lost treasures. But first, we must linger here, in this somber place, and feel the weight of history pressing down. Because only by understanding the depth of what was destroyed can we truly appreciate the value of what survived. For more than 2,000 years, the burning of the Library of Alexandria has been told as a single tragic story, one night, one fire, one catastrophic loss. But history is rarely so simple. Modern scholars argue that the library's fate was far more complex, and perhaps more unsettling than the dramatic image of a single inferno suggests. Step into any academic conference on the subject, and you will quickly discover that there is no universal agreement about when, how, or even if the library was completely destroyed. Some historians maintain that Julius Caesar's fire in 48 BC was a fatal blow, that when the harbor district went up in flames, the main collection was irretrievably lost. Others counter that the library survived this early disaster, only to be gradually dismantled by later wars, religious purges, and simple neglect. This debate is not just academic hair-splitting. It changes how we understand the story of human knowledge itself. If the library was wiped out in a single night, it becomes the ultimate cautionary tale, a warning about how fragile civilization can be. If, on the other hand, it decayed slowly over centuries, then the tragedy lies not in one moment of destruction, but in our collective failure to protect and nurture what was left. One of the central questions in this debate is whether the Mausoleum, the original library within the royal quarter, was still functioning after Caesar's siege. Ancient sources like Strabo and Plutarch suggest that Alexandria remained a center of scholarship well into the Roman period, implying that at least part of the collection survived. The mathematician Pappus and the philosopher Theon were still active in Alexandria as late as the 4th century CE, writing and teaching in what they described as an intellectual community. Could they have been using the remnants of the library's collection? Then there is the Serapeum, the daughter library said to have been stocked with overflow scrolls from the main collection. Its destruction under the Christian patriarch Theophilus in 391 CE is well documented. Contemporary accounts describe frenzied mobs toppling statues, smashing idols, and setting fires. But did those fires consume tens of thousands of scrolls, or had the library shelves already been empty for generations? Some scholars argue that by the late 4th century, the scrolls were gone, leaving only the shell of a once great institution. The Arab conquest adds another layer of controversy. The famous story of Caliph Omar ordering the destruction of the books has captivated imaginations for centuries, but many modern historians are skeptical. The earliest versions of the story appear centuries after the conquest and may reflect anti-Islamic bias from Christian chroniclers. Furthermore, practical questions arise. Could scrolls left untouched for 600 years still have been in usable condition? And could they truly have fueled Alexandria's bathhouses for half a year? The numbers strain belief. Instead, some researchers suggest that the library's demise was less dramatic, a slow withering away rather than a single cataclysm. Scrolls decayed from the damp sea air. Rats and insects gnawed at papyrus. Scribal errors crept into texts until they became unreadable. Political upheaval scattered scholars, leaving the collection uncared for. Over time, what had been a living repository of knowledge became a mausoleum of forgotten scrolls. This slow death theory is chilling in its own way. A sudden fire is a tragedy we can picture, grieve, and move on from. But the idea that a library's light faded gradually, that generation after generation allowed its treasures to rot away, forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own stewardship of knowledge. Are we, too, allowing irreplaceable ideas to slip through our fingers while we argue over politics and power? Even among those who believe the library perished violently, debate continues over which event was most destructive. Some point to Aurelian's reconquest of Alexandria in the 3rd century CE, which devastated the royal quarter. Others highlight Theophilus' destruction of the Serapeum, seeing it as a turning point in the war between pagan learning and Christian orthodoxy. Each theory paints a slightly different picture of history, with different villains and victims. What is fascinating is how this debate has become almost mythic, a Rorschach test for our values. To Enlightenment thinkers, the burning of the library symbolized the triumph of barbarism over reason. To Romantic poets, it represented the fragility of beauty and the tragedy of loss. To modern historians, it is a cautionary tale about centralizing knowledge in one vulnerable location. To conspiracy theorists, it is proof that powerful elites have always hidden or destroyed dangerous truths. And so, the Library of Alexandria remains suspended between fact and legend, a ghostly presence that haunts the imagination. Perhaps this is part of its enduring power. The very uncertainty about its fate allows us to project our deepest fears and hopes onto it. It is both a real place that once existed and a metaphor for everything humanity has ever lost. As the camera pans across modern ruins of Alexandria, with fishermen casting nets where the royal harbor once stood, the question lingers: did a library die in a single night of fire, or did it bleed out slowly over centuries? Did we lose 500,000 scrolls at once, or bit by bit until there was nothing left? Whatever the answer, the result is the same, a silence where once there had been a chorus of voices. But silence, as we will see, is not the same as absence. The next section will explore what traces of this great collection survived, the texts that escaped the flames, the fragments that were copied elsewhere, the clues that allow us to peer, however dimly, into the lost shelves of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria may be gone, but it did not vanish without leaving behind whispers, scattered clues that hint at what once filled its endless shelves. If we listen carefully, we can still hear faint echoes of its wisdom in the works that survived elsewhere, copied and carried across centuries like messages in bottles. When scholars attempt to reconstruct the contents of the library, they often begin with a catalogue compiled by Callimachus, the Penarches. Though the Penarches itself is lost, ancient references to it describe a monumental undertaking, a 120-scroll catalogue that listed every author, title, and subject housed in the library. It was, in effect, the world's first comprehensive bibliography. Even though we no longer have a catalogue, its existence proves just how vast and organized a collection once was. We also have the works of writers who lived and studied in Alexandria. Eratosthenes, for example, left behind treatises that reveal the scope of his research. His calculation of the Earth's circumference was based on data drawn from multiple regions, proof that the library held geographical reports from across the ancient world. Likewise, the surviving texts of Galen, the great physician, are filled with citations of earlier medical works, many of which are now lost but were likely once available in Alexandria. Some clues come from tantalizing mentions of lost books. Ancient authors frequently refer to works we no longer possess, books of Aristotle that went missing, entire histories of early Rome, treatises on mechanics, maps of distant lands. These citations are like footprints in the sand, reminding us that whole intellectual landscapes once existed beyond our reach. Consider, for example, the surviving plays of Sophocles. We have only 7, yet ancient sources tell us he wrote over 120. Where did the rest go? The library may have been their last refuge. The same is true of Aeschylus and Euripides. Imagine the insights into human psychology, morality, and politics contained in those lost plays, stories that could have deepened our understanding of the ancient world. Astronomy offers similar glimpses. Claudius Ptolemy's Almagest, a 2nd century work that survived in Arabic and Latin translations, is essentially a snapshot of Alexandrian astronomy. It preserves mathematical models, star catalogues, and planetary theories that were likely refined and debated in the library's halls. If Almagest is just a tip of the iceberg, what else might have been stored alongside it? Perhaps even heliocentric models that could have changed the course of science by millennium? Fragments of ancient science survived thanks to the work of Arabic scholars during the Islamic Golden Age. In cities like Baghdad, translators rendered Greek works into Arabic, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have perished. When these texts returned to Europe during the Middle Ages, they helped ignite the Renaissance. It is tempting to imagine that at least some of these manuscripts were once part of Alexandria's collection, rescued or copied before the final destruction. Even in myth and legend, echoes of the library persist. Medieval Arab writers spoke of secret vaults beneath Alexandria, filled with hidden knowledge. Renaissance scholars dreamed of finding lost scrolls buried under the sands of Egypt. Though archaeology has yet to uncover such a cache, the very persistence of these stories suggests how deeply the idea of Alexandria's library embedded itself in the human imagination. There are also the daughter libraries, smaller collections that may have carried pieces of the main library's holdings to other cities. Pergamon, Rhodes, Antioch, and even Rome had libraries that were linked by networks of scholars. If a work were copied in Alexandria, there's a chance that a duplicate survived elsewhere, waiting to be rediscovered. And indeed, rediscovery has been one of the great joys of modern scholarship. In the sands of Oxyrhynchus, archaeologists have unearthed thousands of papyrus fragments, including lost works of Sappho, fragments of Menander's comedies, and unknown gospels. Each discovery is like a window opening into the past, a tiny piece of the mosaic that once adorned the halls of Alexandria. But for every fragment we recover, there are countless more that remain lost. The clues we have are enough to prove that the library was real, that it was extraordinary, and that its destruction was a true tragedy. They are also enough to tease us, to make us wonder just how close we might be to finding something revolutionary still buried under the dust of time. As we piece together this puzzle, one thing becomes clear. The story of the Library of Alexandria is not just about loss. It is also about survival, about the resilience of human knowledge, the determination of scribes and scholars across centuries to preserve what they could. And now, having glimpsed what little remains, we are ready to look deeper into the most tantalizing question of all: what kinds of sciences and technologies might have been hidden there, and how might they have changed the course of human history if they had survived? The next chapter takes us into the speculation, exploring the possibility that the library held knowledge so advanced that its survival might have launched humanity into a new age centuries before its time. If the Library of Alexandria was truly humanity's first great research hub, then somewhere in those scrolls may have been the keys to a future that never came. This is where the stories shift from history to tantalizing possibility, a journey into the what-ifs that keep historians, scientists, and conspiracy theorists awake at night. Imagine walking down one of the library's long colonnades, pulling a scroll from the shelf, and unrolling something that changes the course of civilization. What might you find? Start with technology. Ancient writers tell us of devices that sound shockingly modern. Hero of Alexandria, a first-century engineer, described and possibly demonstrated the eolipile, a steam-powered sphere that spun when heated. In other words, a primitive steam engine. Was this a mere curiosity, or did the library hold treatises on harnessing steam power that were never developed further? Some scholars speculate that, had this knowledge been pursued, The Industrial Revolution could have arrived 1,500 years earlier, propelling humanity into a spacefaring civilization long before the Renaissance. Then there are the mysteries of electricity. The so-called Baghdad battery, a 2,000-year-old clay jar with a copper cylinder and iron rod, has been interpreted by some as a form of primitive galvanic cell. Could the Library of Alexandria have contained explanations of such devices, early knowledge of electrochemistry, perhaps even instruction for electroplating or medical electrotherapy? Though mainstream historians remain cautious, the possibility teases the imagination. Medical science, too, was thriving in Alexandria. The physicians of the Mausian dissected human cadavers, a practice forbidden in many other cultures, and made extraordinary advances in anatomy and physiology. Herophilos identified the brain as a seat of intelligence, described the optic nerve, and even measured pulse rates with a water clock. Could there have been surgical manuals far ahead of their time, documenting procedures that we would not rediscover until the 19th century? Might there have been insights into antiseptic practices, vaccinations, or even embryology that could have saved millions of lives centuries earlier? Astronomy is perhaps the most tantalizing field of all. We know that Alexandrian astronomers like Aristarchus proposed heliocentric models, the idea that the Earth revolves around the Sun, nearly 1,800 years before Copernicus. What if the library held mathematical proofs of this model, detailed planetary tables, and perhaps even theories about the infinite nature of the cosmos? If such knowledge had been accepted in antiquity, the so-called scientific revolution might have come 1,000 years earlier, transforming navigation, agriculture, and physics. Some scholars suggest that the library may have preserved maps of extraordinary detail, including knowledge of lands far beyond the Mediterranean world. There are hints in ancient texts of voyages that reached the Indian Ocean, possibly even the Americas. Imagine if Alexandrian geographers had charted global currents, wind patterns, and coastlines. The age of exploration might have begun in Roman times, with galleys crossing the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. The field of mathematics also offers rich possibilities. Euclid's Elements survives, but what of his other works? What of Archimedes' lost treatises, rumored to contain insights into calculus, combinatorics, and mechanics? The Archimedes Palimpsest, a rediscovered medieval manuscript, revealed that he had developed methods close to integral calculus 1,000 years before Newton and Leibniz. How many more such breakthroughs were lost when Alexandria's scrolls turned to ash? Even philosophy might have been radically advanced. The blending of Greek rationalism with Egyptian mysticism, Persian dualism, and Indian metaphysics may have produced a synthesis of ideas that could have reshaped human spirituality. Perhaps there were dialogues exploring democracy, ethics, or human rights far ahead of their time, ideas that might have altered the course of empires and revolutions. And then there's the most controversial possibility of all, knowledge of lost technologies so advanced they border on myth. Legends speak of automata, self-moving machines, built by Hellenistic engineers. There are stories of ancient fire weapons resembling flamethrowers, of intricate mechanical devices like the Antikythera mechanism, and astonishing ancient computer used to predict eclipses. If one such device survived by accident, how many more were described in detail within the library? Could there have been treatises on flight, optics, on metallurgy that would seem futuristic even today? Of course, not all of these theories can be proven. Some are grounded in archaeology, others in speculation. But together they form a picture of a world that might have been, a world in which humanity never suffered the intellectual dark ages that followed antiquity, a world where innovation never hit the pause button for 1,000 years. This is what makes the Library of Alexandria such a powerful symbol. It is not just a story about what we lost. It is a story about what we might have gained. The thought that blueprints for steam engines, cures for diseases, or star maps of distant galaxies may have been sitting in those holes, waiting to be discovered, is enough to make the imagination burn. But speculation can only take us so far. The next step is to focus on what we can reconstruct with some degree of certainty. What do we actually know about the library's holdings? Which sciences were demonstrably ahead of their time? And which of these tantalizing possibilities are most likely to have been real? The next section will take us into one of the most fascinating areas of lost knowledge, medicine and anatomy, where surviving clues suggest that Alexandrian doctors were centuries ahead of their time, and where the tragedy of loss becomes almost painfully personal. Among the treasures that may have lined the shelves of the Library of Alexandria, none were as precious or as tragically lost as the medical texts. For this was not merely knowledge for the sake of curiosity. This was knowledge that could save lives. In the streets of Alexandria, beneath the shadow of the Pharos lighthouse, the very foundations of medical science were being laid, foundations that would be shattered and buried for centuries after the library's fall. At the heart of this medical revolution were the physicians of the Mausian. Chief among them was Herophilos of Chalcedon, sometimes called the father of anatomy. Unlike many cultures of his day, which considered dissection of human corpses taboo, the Alexandrian scholars were granted special permission to study the human body directly. Herophilos dissected, and some sources even suggest vivisected, cadavers to better understand their inner workings. The results were revolutionary. Herophilos was the first to correctly identify the brain as a seat of intelligence, a conclusion that flew in the face of Aristotle's belief that thought resided in the heart. He distinguished between sensory and motor nerves, traced the optic nerve from eye to brain, and described the liver, pancreas, and reproductive organs with astonishing detail. He even measured the pulse using a water clock, developing an early form of diagnostic cardiology. His contemporary Erasistratus was equally groundbreaking. He investigated the circulatory and nervous systems, differentiating between veins and arteries and speculating that the heart acted as a kind of pump. Though he did not fully discover blood circulation, that would wait until William Harvey in the 17th century, his insights were centuries ahead of their time. Imagine walking into the Alexandria Medical School during this era. Students gather around a stone table as Herophilos carefully dissect a cadaver, pointing out the ventricles of the brain, explaining how nerve signals travel, or demonstrating how the heart's valves open and close. Outside, scribes record every observation on fresh papyrus scrolls, copying them for the library so that future generations of physicians could learn from these discoveries. But much of this knowledge would vanish. After the decline of Alexandria, human dissection became taboo again for over 1,000 years in Europe. Medical science stagnated, relying on the incomplete writings of Galen, who himself built on Alexandrian discoveries but never matched their depth. Galen's work survived, but they became dogma rather than a foundation for further inquiry. Errors were copied for centuries without correction because no one dared dissect human bodies to check them. Consider what might have been if the full Alexandrian corpus had survived. Surgical techniques might have advanced rapidly. The treatment of infections, childbirth complications, and battlefield wounds could have improved dramatically. Entire epidemics, from the Black Death to smallpox outbreaks, might have been mitigated earlier if germ theory or sterilization principles had been hinted at in those scrolls. Humanity's average lifespan might have increased centuries sooner. Even fragments that survived hint at this lost brilliance. Ancient medical papyri, like the Ebers papyrus from Egypt, already contained remedies for hundreds of conditions, including diabetes and arthritis. Combined with Alexandrian anatomical research, these could have formed a proto-scientific approach to medicine, centuries before the modern era. It is also possible that Alexandria's physicians recorded knowledge from other cultures. India's Ayurvedic texts, China's Huangdi Neijing, and Mesopotamian pharmacological lists may have been translated into Greek and stored in the library. If so, the Alexandrian collection would have been the most comprehensive medical resource on Earth, combining traditions from across the known world. The tragedy is not only that these discoveries were lost, but that humanity had to rediscover them painfully and slowly. When European scholars in the Renaissance began dissecting cadavers again, they were astonished to find that Galen had been wrong about many details. But if they had access to Herophilos' original works, they might have started where he left off, leaping forward instead of starting over. And this is what makes the loss of Alexandria's medical scrolls particularly poignant. The cost is not abstract, it is counted in lives. How many people died of treatable conditions in the centuries between the fall of the library and the rise of modern medicine? How many mothers perished in childbirth? How many soldiers succumbed to infections? How many children were lost of fevers that could have been cured with knowledge humanity once possessed? The Library of Alexandria was, in many ways, the world's first great medical school, and when it burned, humanity's understanding of its own body was set back by centuries. Yet the story is not entirely hopeless. Fragments of Alexandrian medicine survived through translations preserved in the Islamic Golden Age, eventually reintroduced to Europe through scholars in Spain and Sicily. These sparks would help ignite the medical renaissance, leading to the breakthroughs of Vesalius, Harvey, and Pasteur. In this sense, Alexandria dream did not die completely. It merely went into a long, deep sleep. But medicine was just one pillar of the library's intellectual empire. The next section will turn our gaze upward, to the stars themselves, and explore the astronomical and mathematical knowledge that may have been hidden in those scrolls. Knowledge that could have unlocked the universe centuries earlier than we dared to dream. If medicine was the library of Alexandria's gift to the body, then mathematics and astronomy were its gifts to the mind. Inside those scroll-lined holes, humanity was learning to measure not just itself, but the universe. The thinkers of Alexandria were not merely observers of the heavens. They were pioneers daring to map the cosmos with logic, geometry, and imagination. At the heart of this intellectual revolution stood Eratosthenes, the polymath librarian whose brilliance still astonishes modern scientists. Using nothing more than shadows, a stick, and keen reasoning, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with an error margin of less than 1%. His method was elegant. At noon on the summer solstice in scene modern Aswan, the sun shone directly overhead, casting no shadow. In Alexandria, however, a shadow was cast, and by measuring its angle he deduced that the earth was curved, and from this simple observation he used geometry to estimate its size. Imagine the scene. Students gathered in a sunlit courtyard as Eratosthenes explains his method, tracing circles in the sand, proving that the world is round and vast. This was over 1,700 years before Columbus, and yet Alexandria already knew. But Eratosthenes was not alone. Hipparchus, another great Alexandrian astronomer, made the first known star catalogue, plotting hundreds of stars with remarkable precision. He discovered the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, and refined methods of predicting eclipses. Some historians believe he came close to inventing trigonometry as a formal discipline, laying the groundwork for navigation and engineering. Perhaps the most tantalizing figure of all is Aristarchus of Samos, who proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, suggesting that the Earth revolved around the Sun, not the other way around. Though his ideas were not widely accepted, imagine if the scrolls in Alexandria contained detailed mathematical proof supporting his theory. Could humanity have embraced heliocentrism nearly 2 millennia before Copernicus? Could Kepler's laws and Newton's theories have come centuries earlier, triggering a scientific revolution in the ancient world? Geometry and mathematics thrived in this environment. Euclid's Elements, written in Alexandria, became the most influential mathematics textbook in history. It systematically organized geometric principles into a logical framework that students still study today. But Euclid wrote more than Elements, works on optics, music theory, and other subjects that are now lost. What insights might those missing scrolls have contained? Could they have anticipated the mathematics of light, paving the way for lenses and telescopes long before Galileo? The library likely also contained Babylonian astronomical records, Indian mathematical texts, and perhaps even early Chinese observations of comets and eclipses. By comparing these data sets, Alexandrian scholars could have produced a nearly global picture of the sky. Imagine the precision of their maps, their understanding of planetary cycles, their ability to predict celestial events with accuracy that would not be matched until the Renaissance. Some researchers speculate that ancient cartographers in Alexandria may have drawn maps of surprising sophistication. The Piri Reis map, a 16th century world map of Turkish origin, has been controversially interpreted by some as containing outlines of South America and even Antarctica. If this is true, and the debate remains heated, such knowledge could have originated from ancient sources preserved in Alexandria, knowledge of coastlines that would not be discovered again until the age of exploration. Mathematics, too, might have been far more advanced than we realize. Fragments of Archimedes' work discovered in the Archimedes palimpsest revealed that he had developed ideas close to integral calculus, centuries before Newton. If these works had survived in their entirety, perhaps calculus, physics, and engineering would have leapt ahead by a millennium, ushering in a technological revolution in the Roman era. Imagine a world where Roman aqueducts were engineered with calculus, where catapults were designed with precise ballistic equations, where ship navigation used spherical trigonometry to cross open oceans with confidence. Such a leap might have changed everything, from the expansion of empires to the timing of the industrial age. But these wonders never came. The scrolls that might have contained these theories were scattered or burned, leaving only fragments for later civilizations to rediscover piecemeal. The result was a long intellectual winter. Humanity had to crawl back toward understanding, rediscovering concepts that had once been known but forgotten. And yet, not all was lost. Some of Alexandria's astronomical knowledge survived through translations carried eastward, preserved by Islamic scholars during the Abbasid Caliphate. In Baghdad's House of Wisdom, thinkers like al-Battani and al-Sufi expanded on Ptolemaic astronomy, keeping the chain of knowledge alive until it could pass back to Europe centuries later. In this way, the dream of Alexandria flickered like a candle in the dark, fragile, but not extinguished. Today, when we look up at the stars, we are continuing the work of those Alexandrian astronomers. Every telescope, every space probe, every mission to Mars is part of a story that began under those same skies, in those same libraries, with those same questions. And yet, one can't help but wonder, how far might we have gone by now if none of that knowledge had been lost? Would we have walked on the moon in the Middle Ages? Would we already have colonies on Mars? The answers lie buried in time, but the questions keep us looking upward, just as they did the scholars of Alexandria. In the next section, we will turn from the heavens back to earth and to the histories that were lost. For the library did not only hold science and mathematics, it also preserved the chronicles of empires, the myths of nations, and the stories of entire peoples whose voices are now silent. Science and mathematics may have given Alexandria its reputation as the intellectual capital of the ancient world, but the library was far more than a research center for scholars. It was also a vault of memory, a place where the histories of entire civilizations were collected, copied, and preserved. When the library was lost, it was not just equations and star charts that disappeared. It was the voices of nations, the chronicles of kings, and the myths that shaped the identity of countless peoples. Imagine walking through a wing of the library dedicated to history, scrolls arranged by region, from the Nile Valley to the far edges of the known world. Here might have been detailed accounts of the old kingdom of Egypt, including records of pharaohs whose names we no longer know. Egypt history stretched back thousands of years before Alexandria was even built, and the Ptolemies made it their mission to gather those records. Many of these papyri are now gone, leaving gaps in our understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. How many dynasties, how many rulers, how many events have been erased from our memory simply because their records turned to ash? The same is true of Mesopotamia. We know much about Babylon, Assyria, and Sumer thanks to surviving clay tablets, but countless chronicles are missing. The library may have contained detailed king lists, epic poems, and scientific observations that would have painted a more complete picture of the world's first cities. What if there were texts describing construction of the Hanging Gardens, or detailed military reports of Assyrian campaigns, or even the original versions of myths like Gilgamesh? Greek history, too, suffered losses. We possess only fragments of the works of historians like Ephorus, who wrote a universal history from the fall of Troy to his own time. Where are the missing scrolls of Hecataeus, who described the geography and peoples of the ancient world? Or the annals of Carthage, Rome's great rival, whose records were systematically destroyed after the Punic Wars? Alexandria may have held copies of Carthaginian naval logs, describing voyages beyond the Pillars of Hercules, perhaps even to the Canary Islands or West Africa. Their disappearance means that we will never know how far the Carthaginians explored before their civilization was crushed. And what of history from beyond the Mediterranean world? The Ptolemies were eager collectors, and their agents may have acquired texts from Persia, India, and perhaps even farther east. The Mahabharata and Ramayana of India existed in oral and written form during Alexandria's prime. Were there Greek translations of these epics in the library, offering insights into Indian philosophy and mythology long before they reached the West? Even more tantalizing is a possibility of lost records from Africa south of Egypt. We know that the kingdom of Kush and other Nubian dynasties interacted with Egypt for centuries. Could Alexandria have preserved their oral traditions, genealogies, and histories? If so, we might have had a clearer understanding of Africa's ancient civilizations, their achievements, trade networks, and influence on the Mediterranean world. The Americas, too, present a haunting question. While mainstream historians agree that there was little direct contact between the Old and New Worlds before Columbus, There are persistent theories and occasional controversial finds, suggesting possible transoceanic contact. If any such voyages were recorded, Alexandria would have been the place to store those records. Imagine scrolls describing strange lands across the ocean, with new plants, animals, and peoples. Such documents, if they existed, could have rewritten the history of exploration. Religious history is another dimension of this loss. The library likely housed sacred texts from multiple traditions, Egyptian temple inscriptions, Hebrew scriptures, Zoroastrian hymns, and perhaps even early Buddhist sutras. Some scholars speculate that writings from mystery cults and esoteric schools, including Orphic hymns or Hermetic teachings, might have been preserved there. Their destruction means that we have only partial glimpses of the spiritual life of the ancient world. The most sobering aspect of these missing histories is the effect they had on humanity's timeline. Without these records, later generations were forced to reconstruct the past from fragments, often filling the gaps with myth or speculation. The result is that our understanding of antiquity is like a tapestry with great holes torn through it. We see the pattern, but not the full design. This absence also leaves room for conspiracy theories. Some believe that the library contained evidence of even older, advanced civilizations, perhaps Atlantis, perhaps other lost worlds hinted at in myth, and that its destruction was no accident, but a deliberate attempt to suppress dangerous knowledge. While mainstream historians remain skeptical, the very fact that we cannot prove or disprove such theories keeps the mystery alive and fuels endless debate. What is undeniable is that the loss of Alexandria's historical scrolls robbed humanity of its continuity. It created dark ages not just in science but in identity, centuries when people forgot where they came from, who their ancestors were, and what great deeds they had accomplished. Rebuilding that memory has taken generations of archaeology, scholarship, and detective work, and there are still many blank spaces we may never fill. Yet, even in this loss, there is a spark of hope. Every archaeological discovery, every unearthed inscription, every papyrus fragment found in the sands of Egypt brings us a little closer to hearing those lost voices again. The dream of Alexandria, to gather all knowledge and make it available, continues today in museums, digital archives, and massive scholarly projects. But before we celebrate what we are rediscovering, we must first acknowledge the scale of the silence. The missing histories are not just a curiosity. They are a reminder that memory is fragile and must be protected. Next, we will step into one of the most sensitive areas of this story, the religious and philosophical texts that might have been lost. What secrets of the soul, what visions of the divine, might have gone up in smoke? And how might their survival have reshaped the spiritual map of the world? If history is a memory of what happened, religion and philosophy are the memory of what we believe and how we understand existence itself. The Library of Alexandria was not just a warehouse of science and history, it was also a spiritual crossroads, where scrolls on theology, mysticism, and philosophy from across the known world were gathered and studied side by side. In those halls, the questions of gods and men, fate and free will, life and death were debated by the brightest minds of antiquity. When those scrolls vanished, humanity may have lost not just knowledge but wisdom. Consider first the religious texts that might have been stored there. The Ptolemies were famously inclusive in their collecting. They were interested in knowledge of every kind, sacred or secular. The library almost certainly contained Egyptian temple records and ritual texts, perhaps even original versions of the Book of the Dead or secret manuals describing ancient initiation rites. These were not merely myths but coded systems of belief that guided how Egyptians understood the afterlife and their place in the cosmos. Then there were the Hebrew scriptures. It was in Alexandria that the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was produced. This translation would go on to influence early Christianity and the spread of Jewish thought throughout the Hellenistic world. If the library housed early copies of the Torah, commentaries by Jewish scholars, and perhaps even apocryphal works, then some of the most important spiritual dialogues in history may have been preserved under its roof. Persian religious thought may also have been represented. Zoroastrian texts, including the Avesta, were crucial for understanding ancient Persian dualism, the cosmic struggle between good and evil that influenced later Abrahamic faiths. Imagine if Alexandrian scholars had translated these into Greek, comparing them with Egyptian myths and Greek philosophy. The result might have been a profound synthesis of spiritual ideas centuries before such cross-cultural dialogues became common. And what of India? By the time Alexandria was flourishing, Buddhism had already spread beyond the Ganges plain. Ashoka the Great had sent Buddhist missionaries as far as the Mediterranean world. Could their sutras or commentaries have been stored in Alexandria, perhaps even sparking philosophical exchanges with Greek thinkers? The parallels between certain Buddhist and Stoic teachings, detachment, self-mastery, the pursuit of inner peace, suggest that such contact may have occurred. The library also likely housed the great works of Greek philosophy in their entirety. Today we have much of Plato and Aristotle, but many works by the pre-Socratics are lost. Imagine reading complete treatises by Anaximander on cosmology, by Democritus on atoms, by Heraclitus on the nature of change. Some of these fragments suggest that early Greek thinkers were wrestling with ideas that sound astonishingly modern, quantum-like theories of matter, speculation about infinite universes, and even proto-evolutionary concepts. It may also have contained texts from the mystery religions of the ancient Mediterranean, the Eleusinian mysteries, Orphic hymns, and Dionysian rites. These cults promise to initiate secret knowledge about life, death, and rebirth. Their rituals were deliberately kept hidden from the public, but copies of their teachings may have been preserved for scholars. Had they survived, they might have offered insight into the spiritual psychology of antiquity, and perhaps shown us how the ancients coped with existential fear. The blending of these traditions could have produced entirely new schools of thought. Alexandria was, after all, the birthplace of Hermeticism, a mystical philosophy attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus. The Hermetic texts that survive describe a universe that is both divine and rational, urging humanity to seek unity with the cosmic mind. What if the library had preserved a much larger corpus of Hermetic writings, ones that might have offered a systematic theology that merged science, magic, and spirituality? The loss of these texts has had profound consequences. Without them, many spiritual traditions became fragmented, misunderstood, or lost altogether. Later religions often rebuilt themselves on partial information, sometimes suppressing or condemning rival philosophies they no longer fully understood. A more complete spiritual record might have fostered dialogue instead of conflict, tolerance instead of dogma. Imagine a world where the spiritual wisdom of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Persia, India, and beyond was not only preserved but synthesized, where philosophers debated side by side with priests, and mystics compared notes with astronomers. Perhaps humanity would have developed a more unified vision of existence, one that saw no conflict between science and faith. But instead, much of that wisdom was silenced. When the Serapeum was destroyed and the scrolls were scattered, the continuity of these traditions was broken. Later generations inherited fragments, enough to inspire, but too little to fully comprehend. The result was centuries of spiritual searching, as humanity tried to piece together its understanding of the divine from whatever scraps remained. And yet, as with science and history, traces of the spiritual heritage survived. Some Hermetic texts re-emerged in the Renaissance, inspiring thinkers like Marsilio Ficino and Giordano Bruno. The Septuagint endured, forming a cornerstone of Christian theology. Gnostic Gospels, buried for centuries, were rediscovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, offering tantalizing glimpses of early Christian diversity. These finds remind us that the library's dream, to collect all human wisdom, may never be fully dead. But before we look forward to what has been rediscovered, we must take a sobering step back and examine what happened after these losses. For when the spiritual and philosophical scrolls were gone, a vacuum was left behind, one that may have helped plunge the Mediterranean world into an era we still call the Dark Ages. In the next section, we will confront this historical turning point head-on, how the loss of Alexandria's knowledge may have helped in the light of civilization, setting humanity back for centuries. When the last lamps of Alexandria flickered out, it was not just a city that was left in darkness. Civilization itself seemed to dim. The fall of the library coincided with, and perhaps accelerated, a period historians still call the Dark Ages, an era marked by war, fragmentation, and the near-total collapse of centralized knowledge in the Western world. Picture Europe in the centuries after the fall of Rome. Roads that once carried merchants, scholars, and ideas across an empire now lay in ruins, overgrown with weeds. Great cities emptied, trade dwindled, and literacy declined to a privilege of monks and a handful of aristocrats. Libraries that had once been vibrant centers of learning became isolated monasteries, where knowledge was copied by hand at a glacial pace, and often through a theological lens that filtered out anything considered heretical or unnecessary. The contrast with Alexandria's vision could not be more stark. Where once there had been a dream of gathering all knowledge under one roof, now there was a slow drip of preservation, with most texts vanishing forever simply because there were too few hands to copy them. Every time a scroll decayed, or a codex was lost to fire or war, a piece of humanity's collective memory disappeared, sometimes forever. This intellectual blackout was not total. In the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, some of the classical heritage was preserved. But even there, much was lost. And in Western Europe, it would take centuries before the light of systematic inquiry would shine again. Think about the staggering implications. Without Alexandria's centralized repository, every region had to start from scratch, rediscovering mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy piece by piece. It was as if a great library had been erased from humanity's collective brain, forcing future generations to relearn what was once already known. This period saw a decline not just in intellectual output, but in curiosity itself. Superstition often replaced reason, and dogma overshadowed open debate. Natural phenomena, eclipses, comets, plagues, were seen not as subject for study but as omens of divine wrath. Imagine how different it might have been if Eratosthenes' calculations, Aristarchus' heliocentric model, or Herophilus' anatomical charts had been widely available during these centuries. It is tempting to ask whether the so-called Dark Ages were truly inevitable. Could Alexandria's survival have shortened or even prevented this period of intellectual stagnation? Would Europe have experienced a scientific revolution centuries earlier, leaping straight from the Roman Empire into something resembling the Enlightenment? Of course, history is never so simple. There were other factors, plagues, migrations, economic collapse, that contributed to the dimming of civilization. But the absence of the library's wisdom was a wound that bled for centuries. Without it, humanity wandered in the dark, guided by fragments of memory rather than the full light of accumulated knowledge. And yet, even in this darkness, small candles burned. In the monasteries of Ireland, monks copied what texts they could find, preserving some of the classical canon. In the Islamic world, scholars began gathering and translating Greek works, keeping alive the intellectual flame that would one day be passed back to Europe. These efforts were the thin, fragile thread of continuity, the last echoes of Alexandria whispering through the centuries. But for now, in the story we are telling, this is the moment of despair. The library is gone, the scrolls turned to dust, the whole silent. The dream of a universal collection of knowledge seems dead. The world has entered a long night. The screen fades to black. A pause, and then a single, hopeful spark, the hint that this is not the end. Because from this darkness, we will next witness the first glimmers of rediscovery, the fragments of knowledge that survive, the texts that traveled east, and the scholars who refused to let humanity forget. The dream of Alexandria may have been shattered, but it was never completely extinguished. Even as Europe stumbled through centuries of darkness, the knowledge that had once filled the library did not vanish entirely. Fragments survived, scattered like embers carried on the wind, waiting for the right moment to ignite a new fire of learning. Our story now takes us eastward, to the cities where those embers landed and found shelter. After the fall of Alexandria and the decline of the Roman Empire, much of the surviving Greek knowledge traveled into the Byzantine Empire, where scribes continued to copy and preserve classical texts. Constantinople became a new, though smaller, beacon of scholarship. Its libraries housed works of Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Euclid, and Ptolemy, partial inheritances of the Alexandrian dream. But it was in the Islamic world that many of these texts found their true guardians. During the Abbasid Caliphate, a golden age of knowledge dawned in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Scholars had gathered manuscripts from across the known world, translating Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. The works of Euclid, Galen, and Ptolemy were not just preserved but studied, critiqued, and expanded upon. Imagine the scene. A Baghdad scholar unrolling a Greek scroll, carefully translating it into Arabic while adding his own commentary. In another room, an astronomer uses Ptolemaic star charts to plot planetary movements, refining the data with new observations. This was not passive preservation. It was an active continuation of Alexandria's mission. The knowledge that had once been endangered was now being given new life, in a new language, under a new civilization. These efforts had far-reaching consequences. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, from whose name we get the word algorithm, developed algebra as a formal discipline, drawing on and surpassing Greek mathematics. Astronomers like Al-Battani refined planetary models, paving the way for Copernicus centuries later. Physicians such as Ibn Sina, Avicenna, compiled medical encyclopedias that preserved and built upon Galenic and Alexandrian knowledge, becoming standard references for nearly 700 years. Meanwhile, Christian monks in Europe played their part, painstakingly copying what texts they could find. In the monasteries of Ireland and the libraries of Monte Cassino, small clusters of scribes became humanity's last line of defense against oblivion. These copies, though limited, kept alive fragments of Virgil, Cicero, and Aristotle until Europe was ready to rediscover them. By the 12th century, a great wave of translation began. In Toledo, Spain, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish scholars worked side by side to translate Arabic texts, many of which had roots in Alexandria, back into Latin. Imagine the thrill of a European scholar encountering Aristotle's physics or Galen's medical writing for the first time in centuries. These translations were sparks landing on dry tinder, setting off what would become the scholastic movement and, ultimately, the Renaissance. In this way, the spirit of Alexandria returned to Europe, not as a sudden blaze, but as a slow, growing flame. Universities began to form, from Bologna to Paris, where students debated Aristotle and Ptolemy. The idea that knowledge could be systematically organized and taught to the next generation, an idea born in the Mausian, was reborn. Even the physical fragments of Alexandria found ways to endure. The Archimedes palimpsest, a medieval prayer book discovered centuries later, turned out to be written over lost treatises by Archimedes, preserving insights that had been thought gone forever. The Oxyrhynchus papyri, unearthed in Egypt, reveal forgotten plays and poems, each fragment like a voice speaking to us across millennia. These surviving echoes remind us that knowledge is resilient. It can be burned, scattered, suppressed, but it rarely dies completely. There is always someone, somewhere, who preserves a copy, remembers a line, carries a story forward. This is why the legend of the Library of Alexandria continues to inspire dreamers today. It is not merely a tragedy but a challenge, a call to rebuild, to create a modern library of everything, this time immune to fire and conquest. The Internet, cloud archives, and global digitization projects are, in a way, Alexandria reborn on a planetary scale. But the story of Alexandria's echoes also raises a haunting question. If so much was saved despite the fires, how much more could we have known if the original collection had survived intact? How far ahead might we be, scientifically, culturally, spiritually, if humanity had never been forced to start over? These questions set the stage for the next phase of our journey, the ongoing search for what remains of the lost library. Because even now, 2,000 years later, archaeologists, divers, and historians are still looking for physical traces of Alexandria's greatest treasure. And some of what they are finding may hold secrets that rewrite history yet again. The Library of Alexandria may have burned, but its legend continues to smolder, luring explorers, scholars, and dreamers into a quest that has lasted nearly 2 millennia. The idea that somewhere, hidden beneath the sands or submerged beneath the sea, fragments of the great collection might still lie waiting is too tantalizing to resist. This section takes us into the modern hunt for the lost library, a journey that spans deserts, dives, and dusty archives. Our first stop is Alexandria itself. Today, much of the ancient city lies buried under layers of modern construction, and its legendary royal quarter, where the Mausian and library once stood, is partly underwater, sunk by earthquakes and rising seas centuries ago. In the 1990s, French archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur and his team began underwater excavations in Alexandria's eastern harbor. What they found was breathtaking: colossal statues of Ptolemaic rulers, fragments of temple columns, and entire sections of the palace complex toppled into the sea. Imagine divers moving through a submerged city, beams of light cutting through murky water, revealing sphinx heads, obelisks, and carved stones that once stood in the shadow of the library. Each artifact is carefully raised to the surface, cleaned, catalogued, and studied, clues in a puzzle that has fascinated humanity for centuries. Could some of these ruins mark the very spot where the library once stood? So far, no definitive library has been discovered, but the search continues. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging are now being used to map the buried layers of Alexandria, offering hope that one day we might locate the remains of the great halls where the scrolls were kept. The quest is not limited to Egypt. Some researchers believe that when Alexandria faced repeated destruction, scholars may have smuggled key texts to safer locations, private libraries, hidden archives, or even distant temples. This theory has led treasure hunters to search the deserts of Egypt, the monasteries of Sinai, and even the Vatican's secret archives, hoping to find a time capsule of Alexandrian knowledge. One of the most intriguing discoveries was made in 2004 when archaeologists excavating in Amhida, an ancient town in Egypt's western desert, uncovered a school building with graffiti on the walls, snippets of Greek poetry, mathematical problems, and rhetorical exercises. Though not part of the Great Library itself, these finds reveal the intellectual culture of Roman Egypt and suggest that books and learning were far more widespread than we once believed. If a provincial town had such a repository, what might still lie hidden in Alexandria's ruins? Then there are the papyri. Egypt's dry climate is uniquely suited for preserving ancient manuscripts, and thousands of papyrus fragments have been discovered in rubbish heaps at sites like Oxyrhynchus. These fragments include lost plays of Sophocles and Menander, obscure gospels, and everyday documents that shed light on ancient life. Every new discovery fuels speculation that somewhere, perhaps in an undiscovered cache, scrolls from the library may still survive. Imagine the day when archaeologists open a sealed jar and pull out a papyrus roll that hasn't been touched in 2,000 years, a complete work of Aristotle, or an unknown play by Aeschylus, or a lost book of Livy's History of Rome. Such a discovery would electrify the world, rewriting textbooks and reshaping our understanding of antiquity overnight. Of course, there are challenges. Papyrus is fragile, and even if scrolls have survived, they may be too brittle or carbonized to unroll. But technology is catching up. Scientists are now using multispectral imaging and advanced X-ray scanning to read texts hidden inside charred scrolls without opening them, a method successfully applied to the scrolls of Herculaneum, another ancient library buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. This means that even if Alexandrian scrolls have been found but appear unreadable, we may soon have the tools to resurrect them. The dream of peering into the lost shelves of the library is no longer pure fantasy. It is a real possibility within our lifetimes. There is also the role of modern institutions like the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, built near the site of the ancient library and opened in 2002. This modern wonder aims to recapture the spirit of its predecessor, housing millions of books, digital archives, and research facilities. It stands as both a memorial and a promise, a declaration that humanity will not allow its memory to be lost again. But the search is not just about finding scrolls. It is about recovering a mindset, the Alexandrian dream that all knowledge is worth gathering, preserving, and sharing. Each archaeological discovery, each decoded fragment, is a small act of defiance against the centuries of loss. And so, the legend of the library lives on, not only in the ruins of Alexandria, but in every archive, museum, and research lab where scholars continue to sift through the remnants of the past. The hunt is far from over. And just when you think the story might end here, there's another twist. Theories, some scholarly, some conspiratorial, suggesting that far more of Alexandria's treasure trove may survive than we've been told. Some claim that caches of scrolls lie hidden in secret vaults, guarded by religious or political powers. Others whisper that entire collections may have been spirited away to Rome, Constantinople, or even further afield. In the next section, we step into that world of speculation, into the realm of modern theories and conspiracies, where the search for the lost library becomes not just an archaeological quest, but a story of hidden knowledge, suppressed truths, and the tantalizing possibility that the greatest discovery in history is still waiting to be made. The Library of Alexandria may have turned to ash, but its legend has only grown more powerful with time, and with that legend have come theories, mysteries, and conspiracies that suggest the story may not be over. What if some of the library's scrolls were never lost at all? What if they were hidden, deliberately, and remain under lock and key to this day? The most enduring of these theories points to Rome. When Julius Caesar's troops and later Roman rulers took control of Alexandria, it is entirely possible that some scrolls were removed as spoils of war and transported to Rome. The great libraries of the Roman Empire, including the Library of Rome and the Palatine Library of Augustus, may have held parts of the Alexandrian collection. If so, Some of that knowledge could have survived the centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. Then there are the whispers about the Vatican secret archives. This sprawling, highly secure collection beneath Vatican City contains millions of documents spanning 2 millennia of history. Conspiracy theorists claim that among these treasures may be scrolls rescued from Alexandria, texts too controversial, too heretical, or too dangerous to release to the public. Some imagine entire shelves of lost works of Aristotle, ancient histories revealing hidden truths about early Christianity, or even maps and records pointing to advanced civilizations that predate recorded history. Of course, the Vatican insists that its archives are not secret but private, and while scholars can request access, it is strictly controlled. The idea that the Church might be suppressing ancient knowledge, especially knowledge that could challenge religious orthodoxy, continues to fuel speculation in sensational books, documentaries, and online debates. Another popular theory involves hidden caches beneath Alexandria itself. According to local legends, there are still sealed chambers under modern city, perhaps under the site of the Serapeum or the old royal quarter, containing scrolls preserved in jars or stone containers. Stories abound of tunnels discovered and quickly sealed off, of workers who claim to have stumbled upon ancient chambers filled with inscriptions before being ordered away. Archaeologists have indeed found evidence of underground storage areas and hidden passageways in Alexandria. Whether these once housed scrolls is still a matter of debate, but the possibility keeps the dream alive. The idea that somewhere under the bustling streets of the modern city, a lost archive is waiting to be unearthed is almost irresistible. Then there are the more radical conspiracies. Some claim that the library contained knowledge of lost civilizations, Atlantis, Lemuria, or other advanced prehistoric cultures, and that this knowledge was deliberately destroyed or hidden to prevent humanity from unlocking forbidden technologies. Others argue that the scrolls contain star maps, records of alien contact, or blueprints for free energy devices that would upend modern society if revealed. While mainstream historians dismiss these claims as speculative fantasy, they are undeniably compelling to a public hungry for mystery. They also speak to a deeper truth. The Library of Alexandria has become a symbol of hidden potential, of secrets locked away from humanity's reach. Modern media has embraced these theories, from novels like The Da Vinci Code to television specials that suggest the library's contents may one day be found intact. The Internet has only amplified this fascination, with forums and YouTube channels dedicated to forbidden history, presenting theories about who controls the past and why. Even professional scholars sometimes join the speculation. Could some of the scrolls have been moved to Constantinople, whose great imperial library boasted tens of thousands of volumes? If so, some of that knowledge may have been lost not in antiquity, but during the Crusaders' sack of Constantinople in 1204, a second, later tragedy that may have finally silenced many of the voices that had survived Alexandria's fall. There are even ongoing scientific efforts to test these theories. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed promising anomalies beneath Alexandria that could be ruins or sealed chambers. Multispectral imaging continues to reveal new texts in damaged papyri, including previously unknown works. And digital projects are trying to reconstruct the Penakes Callimachus catalog by cross-referencing every known surviving title from antiquity. What all these theories and conspiracies have in common is a hunger to believe that the past can still surprise us, that there are treasures yet to be found, and that the loss of Alexandria is not final. The hope that one day we might open a chamber, unroll a scroll, and discover a book that changes everything. That hope drives archaeologists, historians, and storytellers alike. And that is the perfect place to bring the story forward to today. Because in the next section, we will explore how the dream of Alexandria is being revived, not in stone halls or papyrus scrolls, but in the digital libraries and archives of the modern world, where the ancient ambition to collect all knowledge may finally be fulfilled. For centuries, the story of the Library of Alexandria has been told as a tragedy, a warning about the fragility of knowledge and the consequences of neglect. But what if we told you that, in our own time, humanity is attempting to finish what the Ptolemies began? What if we are building a new Alexandria, not in stone, but in silicon and light? Welcome to the age of the digital library, an era in which the dream of gathering all the world's knowledge is not only alive but closer to reality than ever before. Today, the Internet has become something the ancient scholars could scarcely have imagined, a global, interconnected repository where books, articles, images, music, and videos can be accessed from anywhere on Earth. In many ways, this is Alexandria reborn. But this time, the scrolls cannot be locked away in a single building or burned in a single fire. They exist in countless servers, mirrored around the world, protected by redundancy and backed up to the cloud. Consider projects like Google Books, which have scanned millions of volumes from libraries across the globe, making them searchable and accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Or the Internet Archive, whose Wayback Machine stores snapshots of websites, ensuring that even the digital present will not be entirely lost to future generations. UNESCO and other organizations are digitizing endangered manuscripts from Timbuktu to Tibet, rescuing them from decay, war, and disaster. In many ways, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the modern library built in Alexandria in 2002, is a living symbol of this dream. Its architect designed it as both a tribute to the ancient library and a leap forward into the digital age. It holds millions of books, but also massive digital servers that connect it to other libraries worldwide. In one sense, it is the closest humanity has come to fulfilling Ptolemy's ancient ambition. But the digital library dream is not without challenges, and these challenges eerily echo the fate of its ancient predecessor. Just as papyrus scrolls were vulnerable to fire and decay, digital data is vulnerable to cyber attacks, server failures, and what archivists call bit rot, the slow corruption of data over time. Without careful preservation, today's knowledge could vanish as quickly as Alexandria's scrolls once did. There's also the issue of digital inequality. In Alexandria, only a privileged few had access to the great library's scrolls. Today, billions have access to online information, but many still lack reliable internet, and some governments restrict what knowledge their citizens can access. The dream of universal knowledge remains just that, a dream, unless access is truly universal. Yet despite these challenges, there is something undeniably hopeful about our current moment. For the first time in history, humanity has the means to gather, preserve, and share knowledge on a scale that dwarfs even the Library of Alexandria. Every day, petabytes of information are created, catalogued, and stored, a living, growing memory bank for the entire species. Artificial intelligence now helps sift through this mountain of information, making connections and discoveries no single human could manage. Digital archives are searchable in seconds, allowing a student in Nairobi to read the same rare manuscript that a professor in Oxford is consulting. This democratization of knowledge is revolutionary, a vision that would have thrilled the scholars of Alexandria. But the story is not finished. The digital library dream also carries a warning. Just as the ancient library taught us that knowledge must be actively protected, so too must we guard our digital heritage. We must ensure that future generations inherit not just fragments but the full record of our age. In a sense, we are all librarians now, custodians of humanity's memory. Every book scanned, every data set archived, every endangered language recorded is a victory against the oblivion that once swallowed Alexandria. And so, the tragedy of the ancient library may yet have a redemptive ending. Its destruction inspired centuries of longing, but that longing has driven us to build something even greater, a library that cannot be contained by walls or destroyed by flames. In the next section, we will reflect on what this means for us today, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of responsibility. Because the lesson of Alexandria is clear. Knowledge is power, but only if it is preserved, protected, and shared. The story of the Library of Alexandria is often told as a tragedy of loss, fire, conquest, and the cool indifference of time. But hidden within that story is a more sobering lesson, one about human hubris. For the library was not merely a victim of history, it was also a monument to humanity's belief that it could capture and control all knowledge. The Ptolemies dreamed of collecting every scroll in the world, of creating a universal archive that left no voice unheard. It was a magnificent vision, but it was also an arrogant one. The very idea that the sum of human understanding could be gathered in one place, under one ruler's protection, was a gamble. It made all that knowledge dangerously vulnerable. When disaster struck, everything was in one basket, and when that basket burned, the world's memory burned with it. This is perhaps the library's greatest warning to us. Knowledge cannot be hoarded or centralized without risk. Its survival depends on distribution, on being copied, shared, and spread so widely that no single fire, no single war, no single tyrant can erase it. Modern society faces the same temptation that the Ptolemies faced, to collect everything in one place, to build vast digital repositories and central servers that hold humanity's memory. We call them clouds, but they are physical machines subject to failure, attack, and neglect. What would happen if those servers failed? If a cyber war wiped out archives? If censorship closed access to crucial information? We like to think we are safer because we live in the digital age, but in truth, we are just as vulnerable, perhaps more so. Our knowledge may be more vast than ever, but it is also more fragile. A single corrupted database, a single blackout, or a catastrophic event could erase terabytes of irreplaceable data in an instant. The hubris of Alexandria was not just in centralizing knowledge, but in assuming that knowledge, once collected, would always be safe. That assumption proved fatal. Scrolls decayed, fires raged, politics shifted, and no one could protect the library forever. The same is true today. We assume that our information will be there tomorrow, that Wikipedia, research papers, cloud documents, even our personal photos and memories will remain available indefinitely. But this is only true if we actively preserve them. The library also teaches us a lesson about the politics of knowledge. What was stored there was subject to royal whims, curated to reflect the Ptolemy's vision of the world. Knowledge is never completely neutral. It is always filtered through those who choose what to collect, what to copy, and what to suppress. Even today, algorithms decide what information we see online, and governments decide what archives remain classified. The fall of the library reminds us that the erasure of knowledge can be intentional as well as accidental. Books have been burned throughout history not just by chance, but by design, to silence dissenting voices, erase inconvenient truths, or reshape cultural memory. In that sense, Alexandria is not just a warning about fire, but about forgetting, deliberate forgetting. And there's another, subtler lesson. Knowledge alone is not enough. The library may have contained the wisdom of the ancient world, but it did not prevent the fall of Egypt, the collapse of empires, or the march of armies through its streets. Knowledge is power, but only if it is used, and used wisely. Having the answers is not the same as acting on them. This is where the library's story becomes more than just a historical curiosity. It becomes a mirror held up to us. Are we repeating its mistakes? Are we gathering knowledge faster than we are learning how to use it responsibly? Today, we face challenges, climate change, pandemics, global conflict, that require wisdom as much as data. We have more information at our fingertips than the Ptolemies could have imagined, yet we struggle to act collectively on what we know. Perhaps the greatest hubris of all is believing that we are immune to the same fate, that our civilization is too advanced, too connected, too smart to suffer the same kind of collapse that wiped out Alexandria's treasures. History tells us otherwise. But there is hope in this lesson. By learning from Alexandria, we can do better. We can distribute knowledge, open source it, back it up in multiple forms, digital, physical, even off-planet. NASA has already stored information aboard spacecraft as a message to future civilizations. Private companies are experimenting with storing data on the moon or in DNA. We can also democratize knowledge. The dream of the Ptolemies was a universal library, but it was still locked behind palace walls, accessible only to a privileged few. Our task is to make knowledge accessible to everyone, everywhere, to ensure that no gatekeepers can hoard it or extinguish it. In this way, the tragedy of Alexandria becomes a challenge rather than a cautionary tale. It calls on us to become better custodians of what we know, to guard against both fire and forgetfulness. The next section will explore how the story of the library continues to inspire dreamers, historians, and scientists, how its very myth has become a symbol of human curiosity, driving us to keep asking questions and to keep building toward a future where no knowledge is ever truly lost again. The Library of Alexandria may have been reduced to ashes, but its spirit has never truly died. Across millennia, it has become more than a historical curiosity. It has become a myth, a symbol, and a rallying cry for human curiosity. The very idea of the library continues to inspire scientists, historians, artists, and dreamers to this day. In many ways, Alexandria's greatest gift to us is not what it preserved, but what it represented. The bold belief that all knowledge is worth collecting, that all voices deserve to be heard, that humanity can transcend its divisions by sharing what it knows. The library was an early declaration that learning itself is sacred, that preserving the memory of the world is an act of civilization. Its legacy can be seen in every great library that came after it. The Library of Pergamon, the Imperial Library of Rome, the great monastic libraries of the Middle Ages, the Bibliothèque Nationale of France, the British Library, and the Library of Congress, all of these can trace their spiritual ancestry back to Alexandria's vision. Each is, in its own way, an attempt to gather the scattered fragments of human thought and hold them safe against the storms of history. But the influence of Alexandria goes beyond architecture and institutions. It lives in the hearts of scholars and seekers who dedicate their lives to discovery. The mathematician painstakingly reconstructing ancient algorithms from clay tablets, the archaeologist brushing sand from a newly unearthed papyrus, the linguist decoding a dead language, each is answering the same call that rang for the halls of Alexandria 2,000 years ago. No more. Writers and artists have also kept Alexandria's memory alive. From Enlightenment philosophers who lamented its burning as a triumph of ignorance over reason, to modern novelists who imagine secret caches of scrolls waiting to be found, the library has become a literary muse. Even in popular culture, films, TV series, and games, the Library of Alexandria appears as a place of mystery and wonder, a metaphor for the ultimate quest for truth. Its story has also shaped how we think about knowledge itself. When we speak of the loss of Alexandria, we are not just mourning books. We are acknowledging a shared vulnerability. It is a reminder that progress is not guaranteed, that civilization can go backward as well as forward, and that each generation must consciously choose to preserve what it has learned. Perhaps this is why the library's myth still moves us so deeply. It is not merely a historical loss, but an emotional one, a symbol of everything we have ever forgotten, misplaced, or failed to protect. It reminds us that human brilliance is fleeting if it is not written down, shared, and passed on. And so, the library endures not in its original walls, but as an idea. We see it in massive digitization projects, in global efforts to document endangered languages, in initiatives to archive scientific data and preserve cultural memory. Every flash drive, every server farm, every research database is a new Alexandrian shelf, part of a universal collection that spans continents and exists outside of time. There is also something profoundly hopeful about this legacy. The destruction of the library could have taught humanity despair, could have convinced us that seeking universal knowledge is futile. But instead, it ignited a longing so powerful that it has shaped centuries of intellectual effort. The myth of Alexandria became a North Star for civilization, guiding us toward ever greater ambition in preserving and sharing what we know. Even NASA's decision to send the Golden Record aboard the Voyager spacecraft, a time capsule of Earth's music, languages, and knowledge hurtling beyond our solar system, can be seen as a continuation of Alexandria's mission. The Ptolemies sought to collect all knowledge of the world. We now seek to preserve all knowledge for the universe, just in case someone, somewhere, someday might find it. And so, Alexandria's legacy is not a closed chapter. It is an ongoing challenge, a call to keep building, keep preserving, and keep dreaming a world where no idea is ever truly lost again. As we approach the final moments of this story, we return to Alexandria one last time, to stand amid its ruins and imagine what it must have felt like to walk those halls in their glory. The voices of the past are still whispering, urging us to protect what we know, to share what we learn, and to never stop searching for what we have lost. The next and final section will bring this journey to its poetic close, a meditation on fire, ash, and hope, leaving us with a renewed sense of wonder and responsibility. The flames are long gone now. The marble halls of Alexandria have crumbled, the shells have turned to dust, and the scrolls, those fragile voices of the past, have blown away on the desert wind. And yet, the fire of the Library of Alexandria still burns, not as destruction, but as memory, as inspiration, as a challenge. As we stand in the ruins of the ancient city, it is easy to imagine that night long ago, the sky glowing red, the smell of smoke, the cries of those who tried in vain to save the scrolls. But it is also possible to imagine something else, a quiet dawn after the fire, when the first light touched the harbor and revealed not just devastation, but the resilience of those who survived. Somewhere, perhaps, a single scribe took up a pen and began copying a scroll from memory, refusing to let the flame of knowledge die. This is a paradox of Alexandria. It is a tragedy that gave birth to a dream. Its destruction was not the end of curiosity, but the beginning of a global quest to recover, preserve, and expand the sum of human understanding. The library's ashes became seeds, scattered across time and space, growing into monasteries, universities, national libraries, and finally into the digital archives of today. Even its absence has shaped us. The story of what was lost has haunted generations, reminding us that knowledge is precious and must be defended. Every time a library is built, every time a manuscript is digitized, every time a language is recorded before it vanishes, we are answering Alexandria's call. And that call is more urgent than ever. The challenges we face today, from climate change to pandemics to global conflict, demand wisdom. They demand that we learn from the past, that we protect the knowledge we already have, and that we seek new truths fearlessly. If the Library of Alexandria teaches us anything, it is that progress is fragile. One act of negligence, one catastrophe, one moment of complacency can set us back centuries. But the library also teaches us that hope is stronger than fire. Humanity's drive to know, to record, to understand, cannot be extinguished. We see it in archaeologists who brush away centuries of sand to uncover a fragment of papyrus. We see it in scientists who scan blackened scrolls with X-rays to reveal words hidden for 2,000 years. We see it in the young student who opens a laptop in a remote village and accesses the accumulated wisdom of the entire planet. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of Alexandria, not the scrolls themselves, but the unquenchable thirst for knowledge that they represented, a thirst that no flame can burn away. So let us imagine, one last time, walking through the halls of the ancient library. The lamps are lit, the air is thick with the smell of ink and papyrus, and scholars debate in hushed tones under the vaulted ceiling. For a moment, the library is alive again. Its scrolls are intact, its catalogue complete, its dream fulfilled. Then the image fades, but the feeling remains, and that feeling is what we carry forward. Because the story of the Library of Alexandria is, in the end, our story. It is a story of our failures and our resilience, our losses and our recoveries, our arrogance and our hope. It reminds us that while fire can destroy, it can also purify, forcing us to rebuild stronger, wiser, and more determined. As the credits roll, we are left with a choice: to treat knowledge as something static, something to be hoarded and feared, or to treat it as Alexandria once did, as a living, breathing flame meant to be shared with the world. The library may be gone, but the dream remains. And if we protect that dream, if we nurture it, share it, and pass it on, then perhaps, in some distant future, humanity will finally achieve what the Ptolemies envisioned, a world where all knowledge is gathered, preserved, and used for the benefit of all. And maybe, just maybe, the Library of Alexandria will no longer be remembered only for what we lost, but for what we dared to imagine,